I've always held the opinion that a great villain is sometimes even more important to the plot than the protagonist of the story. In my opinion, a stellar antagonist really ups the stakes of the plot, increases the engagement of the audience, and makes everything that the hero does even more heroic. Nowhere is this more important than in comic books and animated shows, where the hero is often defined by their rogues gallery. Just look at Batman or Spiderman if you don't believe me. The insanely hit animated show SWAT Kats, the Radical Squadron from 1993, that many of us grew up watching, is stacked in this regard. The sheer volume and variety of villains that we're introduced to in this show during its runtime of 2 seasons, comprised 25 episodes, is mind-blowing. While not every villain appears in the show is a 10 on 10, there rarely is a miss when it comes to their choice of bad guys. Before we begin, let me warn you that this video will contain spoilers for the TV show. With that out of the way, join me as I explore 12 of the biggest threats from SWAT Kats, the Radical Squadron, that we loved to hate as kids. Let's begin. Dark Cat. Every great show needs an overarching villain, and that is set up to be the ultimate test for the good guys. Honestly, I think Dark Cat fits the bill perfectly, from his megalomaniacal schemes to his demonic appearance. I believe that the origins of this diabolical villain were never truly explored in the animated show back in the day. However, over the years, I've heard numerous theories in this regard, with many saying that he was a former corrupt judge or a scientist who was forever changed after gaining his eldritch abilities. While his origin might be shrouded in mystery, I think it's fair to say that his current ambitions are anything but veiled. The man, the Dark Cat, is an absolute genius who will sink to any depth as long as his plans are realized. You need to understand that with Dark Cat, it's never about the short-term gains, as every single one of his schemes is tied to his grand plan of transforming Mega Cat City into his own image, the Dark Cat City. I think his mysterious past only adds to the intrigue behind this character, and it makes him even more spooky and dangerous. As if having genius-level intellect wasn't enough, Dark Cat also possesses the ability to control creatures called the Creeplings that resemble stone gargoyles. It's clear that Dark Cat has struck some sort of unholy bargain to gain these powers. Even though it's not explored how he did it, I think the more important concern is there's not a damn thing anyone can do about it. Dark Cat's ominous presence looms over Mega Cat City throughout the series, and I feel like he was a pretty dark villain for a kid's show back in the day. Dr. Viper. I gotta level with you. Dr. Viper's story is not particularly an original tale, and follows all the cliche tropes of a villain born from the misuse of a secret chemical. My personal opinions aside, Dr. Viper was not always the creepy and cruel half-reptile, half-cat that keeps getting his tail handed to him by the SWAT Kats. Well, he was always kinda creepy, but before he became Dr. Viper, he was a biochemist called Elrod Purvis, working in Mega Cat City's biochemical labs as an assistant to the hilariously named Dr. Enzyme. You see what they did there? Let's be clear that he was not the primary brains behind the operation. So how did this unremarkable guy end up as this monstrosity? Under Enzyme's lead, the two scientists had been working on a miraculous mutagen that was actually meant to be used in agriculture in order to transform barren lands into fertile ones. The good doctor, Enzyme, who had no clue about his subordinates' schemes, wanted to give this chemical to the public for free. However, Elrod wished to sell the formula to the highest bidder in order to get wealthy. This would lead him to sneak into their research lab when his senior was away to steal the mutagen. Unfortunately for him, Enzyme returns to the lab and catches him in the act, leading to Elrod falling off a staircase and presumably dying, with the mutagen spilling all over his body. Despite the mutagen being spilt, Zyme and Elrod had succeeded in their work, just not in the way they'd imagined. In the morgue, the mutagen would work its magic, and Elrod would rise from the dead, resurrected but forever altered into this heinous hybrid. After that fateful day, he began operating from the Mega City swamps, hatching numerous plots to transform the entire city into one massive swamp.
I am the Pastmaster, imprisoned in here for 800.
The Pastmaster. I know that the SWAT Kats were set in a contemporary setting with high-tech weaponry, but the great thing about the show was just how varied the villains were in it. A prime example of this has to be the undead sorcerer called the Pastmaster. Hailing from the Dark Ages, the Pastmaster had terrorized that time period before finding himself stranded in the modern era. Unable to find a way back, the undead wizard would plot to take over Mega Cat City using his Tome of Time and magical pocket watch. I know what you must be thinking. A pocket watch is anything but menacing, but using these two objects, Pastmaster was able to summon all manner of beasts and monsters from the past and myths into Mega Cat City. He would have all but succeeded in his nefarious plans if not for the intervention of the SWAT Kats each time. I recall him also taking the SWAT Kats to a dystopian future that was ruled by machines after teaming up with the Metallicats. I think that was one of my favorite episodes of the series. The only other thing that the Pastmaster loved more than messing around with time and the SWAT Kats was the deputy mayor of Megacat City and long-term ally of our heroes, Callie Briggs. I recall the Pastmaster having the biggest crush on her, as she resembled his ancestor Queen Callista, who the villain had lusted after in the past. Unfortunately for Pastmaster, his approach was anything but charming, which was also not aided by the fact that he was, undead. Regardless, the Pastmaster was my favorite villain as he provided a perfect contrast by adding supernatural and medieval themes to the modern setting of the show. The Metallicats. I've always thought of the Metallicats as the Bonnie and Clyde of the SWAT Kats franchise, if Bonnie and Clyde were psychotic killers. Just like some of the other villains I've covered so far in this video, the Metallicats were not always the robotic terror we know them to be. Their origins are quite literally human in nature. Mac and Molly Mange were two hardened criminals who'd been sentenced to the Alcatraz prison for a series of crimes including murder, robbery, and Grand Theft Auto. However, even a maximum security prison like Alcatraz failed to hold the notorious husband and wife duo as they escaped from their confinement. It was this moment of triumph which would soon turn fatal, changing their lives forever. While trying to escape on a boat from Alcatraz, the couple is drowned and killed after their vessel hits a much larger boat. Their lifeless bodies are found by the robotic attendants of Professor Hackle, who had been working on a secret revolutionary project. Seeing the drowned figures of Mac and Molly, Hackle decided to use them as test subjects and began transferring their mind into two metallic bodies. He had hoped that the two criminals would use this new chance to start fresh and repent for their sins. Unfortunately for Hackle, when the two awaken to find themselves transformed, they're horrified by it. Molly in particular is completely traumatized to find out she's been transformed into a machine, but Mac quickly comes to terms with their new reality and the possibilities that their new forms would offer them. Now nigh indestructible and virtually immortal, Mac and Molly would dub themselves as the Metallicats and begin their reign of terror in Megacat City. I low-key feel that the origins of the Metallicats are one of the most horrific origin stories in the entire show. The criminal couple were basically robbed of their humanity, and the trauma in Molly's voice when she realizes this is something I find haunting to this day. Thanks to their newfound strength and form, they continue to be a threat throughout the series. Dark SWAT Kats. I think you can pretty much guess where we're headed with this one. The Dark SWAT Kats, as you might have guessed, are basically an alternate dimension version of the SWAT Kats. Think of them like what the crime syndicate is to the Justice League. They are T-Bone and Razor, but completely opposite regarding everything. And I mean everything. For instance, the dark versions don't get along well with each other at all, and all of their weapons are lethal. T-Bone is a terrible pilot, while Razor is an equally bad shooter. And there's the fact that they also have a much more unkempt appearance. I think it also goes without saying that the Dark SWAT Kats are allied with the Dark Cat, and are constantly terrorizing their Megacat City. They appear in the Dark Side of the SWAT Kats episode when the original duo is transported to another reality while testing out a dimensional gizmo on the Turbo Cat. I think watching the dogfight between two Turbo Cats was peak entertainment for me back in the day. The two groups immediately lock heads, and after a considerably lengthy battle, our heroes triumph over their villainous counterparts. I like the Dark SWAT Kats because they gave us an interesting perspective on what would happen if our protagonists were to go rogue. As a kid, it was such a unique concept to me, and to this day, they remain one of my favorite villains from this iconic show.
You're alive!
Mad Cat. Hear me out on this one, people. I know the Dark Cat is supposed to be this big bad, and Pastmaster is able to summon dragons and dinosaurs, but I think all of their powers pale in comparison to that of the Mad Cat. I absolutely love his origin story, not only because it's highly eldritch in nature, but I also have a nagging suspicion that the creators were making fun of a certain late-night TV host. Mad Cat is the spirit of an ancient psychotic joker who's been imprisoned by the king, for which he swore revenge on the king, the queen, his replacement, and a knight. However, he'd been trapped inside a jack-in-the-box for centuries before he was set free by an equally deranged and failed comedian, Lenny Ringtail. Lenny had escaped from a mental asylum to seek out revenge on a late-night show host called David Letterman, who is obviously supposed to be the famous host David Letterman. You see what I was talking about earlier? Doesn't the name Lenny sound awful close to Leno, as in Jay Leno? Those of you familiar with this controversy, you know what I'm talking about. Anyway, I digress. So, after Lenny frees Mad Cat from the Jack-in-the-Box, the two merge together to become this crazy, reality-bending entity that manages to push the SWAT Kats to their absolute limit. The crazy fiend believes that the mayor is the king, Callie Briggs is the queen, Letterman is their replacement, and the knights are the SWAT Kats. Even for this TV show, the powers that Mad Cat exhibits are off the charts. He can transform into anything he desires, change the nature of the object he touches, has the ability to teleport anywhere and morph his body into any shape or size. He even manages to take down the Turbo Cat with so much ease, and is only brought down by our heroes when they discover a fatal weakness of his. Out of all the supernatural villains in the series, the Mad Cat just sits behind the Pastmaster as my all-time favorite for this show. Turmoil. You must have noticed that the SWAT Kats series really goes off the rail with the range of themes it covers, from time travel to dimension hopping and a whole bunch of other supernatural stuff. Therefore, I won't blame you for finding this next villain somewhat tame in comparison to all the others I've discussed so far. Turmoil is a female cat who dreams of conquering everything that lies beneath the big blue sky. Afloat on her flagship, the Skylion, she is the undisputed queen of the skies, along with her fleet of fighter planes manned by an all-female crew. Having never tasted defeat, she sets her sights on Megacat City and begins her invasion of the SWAT Kats' home. To start with, she captures the airspace above Megacat City and demands a hefty ransom for others to use it, and threatens to drop every plane that attempts to fly without complying to her demands. In my opinion, looking at her outfit and her accent, she's supposed to be a play on the German dictator Hitler. After T-Bone impresses her with his flying, she brings the duo aboard her flagship to tempt them into joining her. The two do so and even pretend to fall for her charms before eventually betraying and thwarting her plan. Despite not having any spectacular powers, I think Turmoil was still a pretty good one-shot villain. And it's a shame we didn't get to see more of her down the line. The episodes that she's featured in also had a lot of dogfights, or should I say catfights, which is something that's always welcome in a series where the centerpiece is a fighter jet. Hard drive. Up next is hard drive, and I'm not talking about the storage device laying around on your desk. This hard drive is the moniker adopted by one of the most recurring villains in the SWAT Kat series, who appears during some major arcs and proves to be an absolute nightmare to deal with. Originally just a petty thief with a talent regarding computers and technology, Hard Drive had his run-in with the law after hacking some ATMs, allegedly for trying to steal someone else's identity. We see him for the first time in the Night of the Dark Cat episode, and to be honest, I thought his powers were pretty cool. So his gimmick is that he has a technologically advanced and augmented coat, which he calls the Surge Coat, that grants him various abilities. The coolest of which, in my opinion, is the ability to transform into living electricity that lets him traverse through any form of circuitry, making him perfect for espionage and sabotage. Hard Drive is also able to generate electricity, which he can then use as a weapon in combat against his enemies. However, he's not really a fighter or a brawler. His expertise lies more in hacking into electronic devices and controlling. My most memorable episode of him is the one in which he hacks into the turbojet's interface, which allows him to control the craft. He then uses the jet to commit a series of crimes against the citizens of Megacat City in an attempt to defame the SWAT Kats. The entire plot is actually Dark Cats, who wants to make the city turn against their famed defenders. Unfortunately for Hard Drive and Dark Cat, their plot is uncovered and thwarted by our heroes. As mentioned earlier, he later appears seemingly working on his own and continues to clash with the SWAT Kats. The Red Lynx. Now that we've reached this point in the video, I think it's pretty evident that the villains of this series are anything but normal. In fact, the most normal villain in this tale has to be Turmoil, but the same cannot be said for her alleged ancestor, nicknamed the Red Lynx. Red Lynx was an ace pilot during the Mega War II, who was known for his cruelty as much as he was for his flying skill. In fact, his enemies dubbed him the most evil pilot that had ever existed. I believe that the Red Lynx is inspired by the real-life German ace, the Red Baron, and while Mega War II is obviously an allusion to the Second World War, despite the immense terror inspired by him, the Red Lynx would be doomed to a watery grave after he was shot down by the Blue Manx. All is well until the moment the elections for the mayor of Megacat City approaches. Sensing the descent of his nemesis, Blue Manx, who happens to be Mayor Manx, the Red Lynx rises from his watery grave to have his vengeance. Despite the SWAT Kat's best efforts, the ghost pilot doesn't stop in his quest, as only a descendant of Manx is said to be able to put Lynx down for good. I found it so hilarious and true that Manx is this cowardly mess the entire time, until Razor reminds him that he would never be reelected should Red Lynx succeed. As a kid, this villain turned out to be much more creepy and scary than I expected, and remains one of the most memorable villains from the series. I think not many people realized that the Red Lynx was voiced by none other than the legendary Mark Hamill. Morgulus. I have to be honest, this next villain is probably one of my least favorite characters in the entire series. I think his design, powers, and role in the story are really unremarkable compared to every other villain I've discussed in this video so far. Morgulus just appears one day with no real explanation about his motivation and origins and begins bombing the oil refineries of Megacat City. His gimmick is the fact that he has an extra pair of eyes in the back of his head, which leaves him with no blind spots in a dogfight. Having discussed villains that can warp reality, travel through time, control monsters, and even commandeer an entire fleet of fighter planes, you can see why I find this guy so boring. In fact, this reflects in the show, where the SWAT Kats are easily able to put down his plane, but plot armor allows him to escape capture. Unfortunately for him, his path crosses with that of Dr. Viper, who turns him into a lab rat and exposes him to one of his highly unstable mutagens. Thanks to the mutagen, Morgulus transforms into an enormous bacteria-like creature, which continues to divide and multiply every time it's attacked by the SWAT Kats. The poor fool loses his own body and consciousness and turns into a horrid monster. I actually kind of feel sad for the guy in retrospect. He's soon put out of his misery by the SWAT Kats, bringing an end to his short, ill-fated rampage. Zed. For the penultimate entry for this video, let me introduce you to yet another failed experiment that goes rogue. I guess Zed's not really a failed experiment, to be completely accurate. It's more like it grew too efficient to the point it malfunctioned. Zed was the creation of Dr. Greenbox, who intended the robot to be used for microbrain repairs. Unfortunately, the robot is found by the Metallicats, who use it to repair their own bodies, which leads to it being corrupted by their personality, and it gains sentience. Following this, it follows the Metallicats around, doing their bidding for a while until it outgrows their ambitions and begins planning its own grand scheme. Soon, it begins assimilating all sorts of technologies in order to upgrade itself, including Mac to Molly's Horror. This leads to an unlikely alliance between Molly, Dr. Greenbox, and the SWAT Kats against the now heavily augmented Zed, who's begun assimilating other powerful weapons as well. Zed grows so strong that even the SWAT Kats are thwarted by it, in their initial attempt to put an end to his rampage. Eventually, it assimilates Molly as well and corrupts Dr. Greenbox before being defeated by the SWAT Kats after a grueling battle. Zed was so powerful that in the end, had it not been stopped, it was on the verge of blasting Megacat City off from the face of the planet. For me personally, the entire character arc surrounding this villain made it more interesting by the slow descent of Dr. Greenbook from a benevolent character at the start of the series to a malevolent individual. Zed is arguably the strongest technological threat that the SWAT Kats faced during their entire run, in my opinion. Mutilor. So far, I've introduced you to a variety of villains, but no matter how bizarre or fantastical, they've been grounded on Earth. The final villain is not of this world, and by that I don't mean an alternate dimension or timeline, he's literally from outer space. I knew that the SWAT Kats had missed something in their laundry list of villains, and it was aliens all along. I'm glad they covered that base too, with the introduction of Mutilor. Leading a group of space pirates belonging to the Aquian race, Mutilor was a brutal alien who had destroyed several worlds before Earth. Upon arriving on the SWAT Kats planet, the alien overlord's plan is to steal all of the Earth's water and sell it to another alien race called the Saharbi. Possessing technology far more advanced than what exists on Earth, Mutilor is able to score a series of early victories, which makes him grow immensely arrogant. This allows the SWAT Kats to capitalize on his hubris and take the fight to him. In the battle that ensues, the Turbo Cat is destroyed, but not before Razor manages to launch a final missile at Mutilor, killing him in the process. The villain is a one-shot that appears in the third episode of the second season of the show, titled When Strikes Mutilor. What makes this villain unique in my eyes is the fact that just for once, a villain has posed a threat to the entire planet and not just Megacat City. I think due to this, I would personally consider him the strongest villain in the series, because he literally had the potential to destroy Earth. While he couldn't end the SWAT Kats, I think he's the perfect character for me to close this list on. I think this gallery of villains speaks volumes about the SWAT Kats as a show and why it was so popular back in the day. No doubt the high-flying action and all the inventive weapons of T-Bone and Razor captivated the imagination of fans everywhere, but the villains also added many different layers to their overall story. I mean, just look at the sheer variety of villains that the show introduced. From ghost pilots, undead sorcerers, alien pirates to cyborgs, there was something for everyone here. The amazing thing was that the show revolves around two super talented mechanics who operate a fighter jet to combat these threats. I find it fascinating that the threats they deal with and their tools to do so don't really match up on paper, but on TV, it's absolute cinema. Now, it's your turn to tell me, who do you think is the strongest villain in the entire series? For now though, it's time for me to say goodbye. I hope to see you soon in the next one. Until then, stay safe and stay marvelous.